Paynter, and I work as an editor for Wild Goose. Welcome. Hello. So I work with Sandra Kramer, who's the publishing manager, and Jane Dorick Riley. Sandra does so much. She's also an editor, does layout, marketing, everything. Jane is a creative force as well, does admin, royalties, covers, layout. We all do a little bit of everything and a lot of something. They're very good people to work with, very human people, very creative, very talented. We've worked together for a long time, decades really. And I feel really fortunate to be able to work with them. They're really good folks. So first thing I want to do is say hello to Sandra, wherever you are out there. Hi, Sandra. And to Jane out there in Spain, in Barcelona. Hope things are okay in Barcelona there, Jane. I know lockdown's been hard in Spain as it's been here. So tonight we have John Bell, who's going to read for us. He's in Glasgow. Ruth Burgess, she'd be in Dunblane. Jan Sutch Pickard out on the Isle of Iona. Thom Gordon in the Edinburgh area. Katharine Preston in New York State. And Thom Schuman in Ohio. And I'm in South Lanarkshire, and we're locked down again here in Tier 4. I think it's great that the American connection with the community is really coming on these days. The roots are getting deeper and deeper all the time. So that's why I really wanted to invite Katharine and Thom to read. And Thom's been doing books, for Wild Goose for years. And he's a wonderful guy to work with. I'm Canadian, but I have a real American connection. I really feel a strong connection to America because, I was born in Toronto and I grew up in Windsor, which is just across the border from Detroit. So Detroit was always in view, and I always went over to Detroit. And my dad, like a good dad, we're trying to escape the Canadian winters. And he'd drive for 3 or 4 days through the States. So we'd start off in Ontario, and then we go through Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee. And then depending on where we were going in Florida, we'd go down through Georgia or Alabama, Florida. And as a kid, that was the first sort of taste of another country. And I just really got a feel for how rich America was, how diverse people were, the accents, the food, the music, the geography. Just picking that up as a kid, it really made me feel alive. And I just loved doing that. And I can remember one time, so my dad drove us down, and the car broke down in Macon, Georgia. And this is something my mom always talks about. Remember the car breaking down in Macon, Georgia. It's a family story. It broke down in Macon, Georgia during the funeral of Otis Redding. So my dad needed to get a car part in Macon, Georgia during Otis Redding's funeral. And so my dad would always answer my mom by saying, yeah, well, you try to get a car part in Macon, Georgia during the funeral of Otis Redding. So I always remember that. And, we go to Florida, and, the first thing you're excited about is the sight of the ocean. You see the ocean, and then you hear the ocean, and then you get out of the car and you run and you smell the ocean, and you go down to the sea. And then you just spend hours and hours and hours looking for shells and rocks and things, and you get totally lost in that, in the joy and the wonder of that. And, so many times when I was on Iona, I'd remember that. And that's a real connection with America, that feeling of going along the seaside. So when I was working on Iona, I'd remember that, on Port Ban or North End, Sand Hills. And I guess then, even now, that was sort of unconscious prayer and being totally in the moment, out of self. And that, you know, helps me to be more in the moment when I go back to the world. So, so God bless America, and thank God Trump's not there anymore. That's hope for the world to me. I'm sure to most of you, if not all of you. And we'll hope about what's happening in Georgia with the Senate elections, and I hope that gets even better. Associates in Georgia will know more about that. Mark Reeves and Leslie Withers, if they're out there, they can probably tell us more about that some other time. So we have American authors, we have people from Scotland, and Wild Goose, we have authors from all over the world. I was thinking about that when I was sort of planning this, and other people in America, and I think of like Nelson, all of Israel Nelson in Alaska, and Nancy Cox in Medicine Hat in Alberta, you know, people write for Wild Goose from Australia, from our sister community, Wellspring, New Zealand, John McCall in Taiwan, associates in Cuba, volunteers from my own, you know, worked on Iona, Brazil, Paraguay, June Walker out in Malawi, you know, has written for us, Marks and Masande and Frida Ofula in Kenya, Dora Namwija, who was a volunteer on Iona, and of course, all the wonderful continental folk in Germany and Holland and all over, you know, Desiree and Elizabeth Meischer and Reinhard Treitler. So I couldn't invite everyone, you know, I had to just think of some people off the top of my head who I wanted to read. I could have come up with a totally different configuration of folks. So hopefully people understand that. And all of us reading tonight are of a certain age, you know, probably past 50, but we have, you know, younger writers writing for Wild Goose too, like Laura Gisborne, who just wrote for this nice collection, The Adventurous Beginning. Annie Sharples, who wrote, my lovely assistants handing me books, who wrote for Sue Dale's wonderful new collection, Standing on Our Stories. Rachel McCann, one of the highlights of 2021 will be Rachel's Camus book that she's edited so amazingly, and there's so many young people's voices in there. Alex Claire Young, who wrote Transgender Christian Human, is a youngish author. So we have lots of young folk writing for us as well. So after that, I'll hand on to John. Thanks a lot, John, and I'll just say a prayer before we start from the Iona Abbey worship book. For the word of God in Scripture, for the word of God among us, for the word of God within us, thanks be to God. And I'll just hand over to John now.
Well, hello. I'm very glad I've been off and on because this has been a bad link. But I'm very pleased to be here. And I want to begin just by saying a very warm word of congratulations to Neil and to Sandra and Jane, who work with him, for enabling this to happen. I probably am the only person who is around who remembers the beginning of Wild Goose publications. It was a rather unusual affair. A boy who was unemployed would take a suitcase with 3 books in it around the shops in Scotland to see if they were interested in buying stuff from the Iona community. And frequently the answer was no, because the general rumour in some churches was that the Iona community was taking the Church of Scotland to Moscow via Rome. Well, these are very different days. And I'm very happy to begin this series of readings, although what I'm going to read is perhaps not perhaps the cheeriest thing. I've got 2 pieces here. The one is a piece which was written for a minister in Edinburgh who had the really unusual occasion of being asked to speak at a kind of memorial service to a number of young people who had died in a car crash who were in this particular school. One of them was a Muslim, and the rest were nominally Christian. And he wrote to me to say, is there anything that I might be able to use which might somehow or other speak to this crowd of young people about, about death? Well, we're in a very interesting situation at the moment where people are very aware of death, particularly when every day we get numbers of those who have died through COVID-19. So I want to read this, and it's really what you might say the testimony to some extent of an unborn and then the born child. I never wanted to be born. The older I grew, the fonder I became of my mother's womb and its warmth and its safety. I feared the unknown, the next world, about which I knew nothing but imagined the worst. Yet as I grew older, I sensed in my soul that the womb would not be my home forever. Though I did not know when, I felt sure that one day I would disappear through a door which had yet to be opened and confront the unknown of which I was afraid. And then it happened. In blood, tears, and pain, it happened. I was cut off from the familiar. I left my life behind and discovered not darkness, but light, not hostility, but love, not eternal separation, but hands that wanted to hold me. I never wanted to be born. I don't want to die. The older I grow, the fonder I become of this world and its warmth and its safety. I fear the unknown, the next world, about which I know nothing but imagine the worst. Yet as I grow older, I sense in my soul that this world is not my home forever. Though I do not know when, I feel that one day I will disappear through a door which has yet to be opened, perhaps having come so safely through the first door, I should not fear so hopelessly the second. Now, the other piece is entirely different, and I can't remember quite when this came about, but it had to do with that rather odd thing that people experience at this time of year, nativity plays. Big issue in Great Britain just now is that because of the pandemic, there might not be many nativity plays able to happen in public. I think it's a funny thing, because it really is a group of parents who get together in the hope that their child might make the funniest mistake with regard to the nativity plays. So this is a boy who's only heard about Christmas through doing a nativity play, and this is his impression. Christmas is a time for children because the baby Jesus was a child. So were his mum and dad. Mary was 10 when she had her baby, because that's how old Cheryl Foster is. And Joseph was 11, like Ravinder Singh. Joseph was not the real daddy of Jesus. The real daddy was Mr. Montgomery, our school janitor, who is also Santa Claus. Mary was pregnant, but stayed very thin, unlike my mum when she was having wee Sandra. Mary always wore a blue nightie, and Joseph wore a dressing gown, like Ravinder Singh's dad. Mary and Joseph had to travel from the back of the school hall to Bethlehem on a donkey called Jerry, after Miss Montgomery, the janitor. Caesar Augustus wanted the whole world to be taxed. That is why everybody went to Bethlehem, and it was so crowded. People had come even from Africa and Australia because there is no snow there. Mary decided that she was going to have the baby right away in the snow because there was no room at the inn. The innkeeper had a wife whose name was Veronica. She was also one of the ugly sisters with big feet. The innkeeper's name was Lo, because Joseph said to him, Lo, my wife is great with child. Lo took Mary and Joseph to a dirty cowshed. It was full of steams and smells from the pigs and cows and hens who had gathered together for the census. Mary had her baby in front of everybody. When he arrived, everybody realized why she was dressed in blue. She knew it was going to be a boy. She called him Jesus, and immediately he sat up to the roof where there was a draught. Some shepherds came to see the baby. They had been told by the angels to bring a lamb. Joseph put the lamb in the manger beside the baby Jesus. The shepherds got in just before the wise men who wore Mrs. Anderson's silk scarves after they promised not to wipe their nose on them. The wise men had gifts for the baby, a big stone covered with gold paper, a perfume bottle full of red water, and incense sticks. Joseph put these in the manger next to the lamb and the baby Jesus. Then the shepherds and the wise men knelt down in front of the baby Jesus and sang jingle bells. Then Mr. Montgomery came in dressed as Santa Claus, but Mrs. Anderson shouted at him because it was not time yet.
Thanks, John. Okay, so you'll all recognize this. This is actually from the Iona Abbey shop many moons ago, Dorothy Miller's time. So when you see the goose, there's going to be a question. It's going to be an opportunity to win a book from Wild Goose. I have a magic bin or basket of books here, all sorts of titles. And I'm going to ask you a question. When you see the goose, you'll know a question's coming, so you can get ready. And what we'll do is after the Zoom night, you can email me at neil@ionabooks.com. That's NEIL @ionabooks.com after the Zoom night, whenever you want. And the first answer in my emails that has the right answer, I'll get in touch with you and you can figure out what book from my magic basket of books you would like. And I'll put it in the mail for you and that'll be a joy. So the first question that I have for the first is, and I really hope I have the right answer, and I'll check it with the amazing Gail at Wild Goose Resource Group, and maybe John too, is this is the question. So you answer at the end of the Zoom night, neil@ionabooks.com, win a book. What was the first music collection that John and Graham published? The first music collection that John and Graham published. Now, this might be in print. It might not be in print. I'm not going to say any more. Okay, and yeah, you can check the internet. I'll never know, but you'll know. You'll know you cheated. So don't cheat. If you know the answer, email me at the end of the Zoom night. That's the first question. What was the first Mull Bell collection of music? And I think I know the answer. And while I have John there, because he's there, he can't really get away. John, I know you collect a lot of world melodies from different people, and it's kind of always surprised me that you've never used this one. So I guess this is my opportunity to try to get you to listen, and you can pick this up. You don't really have to credit me for it, but you could. And I'm just going to sing. I'll have to sing it really gently because I don't know how Zoom distorts things. But just think about this as a possible Wild Goose song, okay? Wild goose You make my heart loose. You make everything goosey. Come on, wild goose. Wild goose, I think I love you. But I want to know for sure. Come on in, sing it to me one time. I love you. Come on now, wild goose. So John, that's the idea. And it's Chip Taylor is the melody from the Trogs. And if you want to credit me, it would be, I would credit it like this. I would credit it as Jimi Hendrix / Neil Paynter. That would be the credit I would, I would really sort of like if you could do that. And even it has lots of potential, I think, because, even in the, Wild Goose, I think I love you. You could make the tenor go la 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 la. It's just an idea. So whatever you think. So I'll now hand things over to Ruth Burgess to read. Thanks, Ruth.
Hello, everybody. I want to read 3 pieces tonight. The first one I actually didn't write. Those of you who know my books know that a lot of them are collections of writing, and I'm in a very privileged position that I can ask other people, other writers, for contributions to the books that I put together. And I just feel very privileged to be able to do that. Some of these people I meet occasionally. Some people I've never met, though we've been emailing each other for years. And I just wanted to read something tonight from somebody else, just as a kind of thank you for the people who've trusted me with the stuff that they've sent. I'm really grateful. And another quick thank you I need to say is to Neil and to Sandra and to Jane. My English grammar is absolutely dreadful. Thankfully, theirs is very good. So what you eventually get is very readable, and I'm grateful for that. Okay, this first one is by somebody called Brian Ford, who I've never met. I've been emailing for a long time, but his stuff always makes me smile. So that's why I chose to read this one. It's the prayer of a patriarch, a man of his time, and it's called Noah's Prayer. Lord, I am really grateful. Really, I am. We're all safe in the ark when everyone else is drowned. And Lord, I am sorry about the phoenix. We didn't believe the stories. We thought they were old wives' tales. How it got hold of those pieces of flint, I don't know. Lucky we smelt the smoke in time, eh? Pity we couldn't save the bird. Shem reckons it was an evolutionary adaptation to nesting in the same place in the desert every year. The fire would get rid of the parasites, he said. Know all. And Lord, I have a rather indelicate matter to raise. Should I mention this to you? But you created everything, so you understand about dung. There are piles and piles of it. The dung beetles are in heaven, but I'm literally up to here with it. The others say that I mustn't pollute the oceans and that we'll need it later as organic fertilizer. But please, would it be okay to chuck some of it overboard? And Lord, they're all moaning about Japheth. It seemed a logical division of labour at the time, allowing specialisation, development of expertise. I look after the mammals, Ham does the birds, Shem takes the invertebrates, and Japheth the reptiles. But reptiles only need feeding once a week. He can witter on as much as he likes about constantly monitoring environmental conditions, but the others reckon he's onto a cushy number. And Shem reckons he's running out of food for the locusts, and they'll turn cannibal if they're starving. Is he having me on, Lord? And Lord, We started off with 2 rabbits. Now we've got 54. I thought I'd give the foxes a treat, a bit of fresh meat. You can't do that, says Madam. Those bunnies are so sweet. She didn't object when I fed the baby rats to the pythons. Is that the criteria I use to decide who is to live and who's to die? Cuteness. It's enough to drive a man to drink. It really is. This is another Old Testament piece. This is one of mine. Often when I'm thinking my way into a story, I look at different translations of the Bible, and they can be very different. So this one's called What's Going to Happen to Nineveh? What, according to Zephaniah, will happen to Nineveh? One thing is clear. Nineveh will become a desert ruin. But according to which translation of the Bible you consult, an amazing variety of creatures are going to take over the houses and the streets. According to the King James Version, bitterns and cormorants will take up lodgings in the upper lintels and squawk out through the windows. The Good News Bible has owls hooting in the darkness and crows cawing on the doorsteps. The Revised Standard Version introduces vultures and ravens and a hedgehog snuffling underneath the floor. The Message has raccoons and coyotes bedding down happily in the basement. The Jerusalem Bible goes for porcupines, and apparently they nest around the cornices at night. The Wycliffe Bible has an onocrotalus and an urchin in the doorway. According to my dictionary, that's a great white pelican and maybe an elf or a sprite. The Easy to Read Bible goes for blackbirds. The International Children's Bible has sheep and goats. What, according to Zephaniah, will happen to Nineveh? One thing is clear. It's going to be a very interesting place. The last one, I have my dad's Bible. It's a King James Version. It's falling to bits. But in Psalm 139, there's a verse which reads, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. We are made up of stardust and stories, of warmth and wonder, of blood and bread. We are made up of seeds and sinews, of hope and harvest, of living and dead. We are made up of genes and memories, of tears and laughter, of bones and breath. We are made up of God and glory, of love and questions, of life and death. Thank you.
Ruth.
Yeah.
Ruth, remind me of the books those pieces are from.
Hang on. What's going to happen? No, Noah's Prayer. I think it's in two because I liked it so much. I think it came in a book in about 8 years later, but it's definitely in Olives and Obligations. What's going to happen to Nineveh is in Fig Trees and Furnaces, and We Are Wonderfully Made is in Saying Goodbye.
Okay, so Olives and Obligations and Fig Trees and Furnaces are both resources for the Old Testament. So those, I think, are great books for anyone who wants. I mean, the Old Testament eludes some of us sometimes. So those are good resources. They're direct, they're funny. So anyone who's looking for resources on the Old Testament, you know, a minister or a church or a community or a house church, those are good books to pick up. I think that's true about your books, Ruth. What I really love about working on them is the community of people. all the different voices, all the different people from all over, you know, quite a lot of them members and associates, but not always. They're always new people coming in that you find, or through word of mouth, somebody says something about. I find it a real, it's doing books is work, but I find it a privilege to work on those. And I love all the different voices and the way they go together, and the way they bounce off of each other.
Me too.
In some books, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 people, which is fun when you're sending out permissions. But anyway, I'm glad you read the last one you read, one of your prayer poems. I always find your writing, when you write that way, very tight and pared down and simple, and beautiful. And I remember asking you one time about something, and I said, "Oh, that's really, like any good writing, no extraneous words, beautiful, tight." And you said to me, "Well, it didn't start that way." And and I know what that's like. It didn't start that way. I was just wondering, I know some years back now, you used to go into schools and work with children, prayer writing and just talking about the Bible. And, a lot of children's writing has shown up in your books in different collections. And I've always appreciated that. Children, it's simple. They don't confuse things. They don't clutter writing the way we do, or life the way we do sometimes. I just was wondering if working with children helped you to pare down your writing, to keep it simple, to keep it direct, to keep it childlike in the best way. And if that's true, I'm wondering how you think we grow to be more childlike. How is that about keeping playing in life, keep taking chances, knowing that we're held? What would your answer or reaction be to that? What would you say?
Sounds like about 5 questions to me, Neil, not one. In terms of writing, most of the children I worked with had quite a low reading age. And I think when I write, I try not to write stuff that's above the reading age of about 12 to 14, often lower than that, because that's a lot of the people in our congregations. So, I would want to do that. And that's the way I find easiest to write as well. I could end up with something that was 50 lines and it will come down to 12, but occasionally I can just write it straight off. It just happens. And probably those are the best ones, but it doesn't happen very often.
Well, I think, sorry, go ahead. I think you can write it if it just comes out. I think you have a voice, like all good writers, you have a voice, and that takes work. That takes living. That takes a lot of words before you find that.
But it's good when it happens.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
What was the second bit?
Oh, I can't remember. How do we?
Worry about it then.
Okay. We'll get back to it. We'll talk to you on the emails. Thanks for all the emails. Okay. I think we're on to Jan now. Jan out in the Isle of Mull.
Yes, thank you, Neil. Yes, you've transferred me back to the Isle of Mull. You had me in Iona in the introduction.
Did I really? Wow.
I looked around nervously and thought, no, I'm here. I was in Iona earlier this week, and it was good to see what's happening there. It was good to see that tiny handful of people who are embodying the Iona community in their own version of living in community, rattling around in the abbey a bit, but welcoming, as you would expect. And I was there looking at books, quite a lot of books that are stored there. But let's come to the poems that I brought with me. I've so much enjoyed listening to John and Ruth. I now feel put on the spot. Quite often I do write from a biblical base, that the words of the Bible, although not necessarily a menagerie such as Ruth was dealing with. The words of the Bible inspire me, draw me out. But in fact, the three pieces I've got are all ones that come from experience in engaging with life, particularly as one of a community who have a justice and peace commitment. So, and I think that the third piece I read will be in my own voice on my own doorstep, but the first one comes from being a long way away, and it's not about my feelings, it's about what I observed when I was a peace observer, an ecumenical accompanier in Israel, Palestine, and when I joined the people who were monitoring what went on at the Gilo checkpoint on the edge of Bethlehem. So this is early in the morning, and it's simply observing what happens when a lot of people are trying to go through a checkpoint. Dark and cold before dawn, where men who rose much earlier are waiting to go to work, packed into long, narrow pens that run the length of the ramp along that concrete wall scrawled with scorn and defiance, though in the dark no one can see the writing on the wall. Nor can you see the faces of these men huddled together, leaning on the wire fence which bulges with the weight of humanity barely contained. All you can see is here, a hand grasping a bar, there, breath puffed out in the chill air, or spidering forms against the sky, trying to climb into a cage already crammed through razor wire. Weary with standing still for more than an hour, a score of men are sitting down on the ground by common consent, shoulder to shoulder, their upturned faces catching what light there is. Here, someone coughs. Over there, a man lights a cigarette and passes it round. No one is talking. What is there to say? Yet filling the dark, a shapeless sound, like grieving. 700 men waiting for someone to open a gate, hoping for a way out, and just breathing. So that one was called Just Breathing, and it's in a collection called A Pocketful of Crumbs. And it would take too long for me to explain why the collection's called A Pocketful of Crumbs, except that also comes from experience with different groups in Israel, Palestine. So I'm a member of the CCN, the Common Concern Group, looking at how we in Britain relate to Israel and Palestine, and trying to hear the voices of the people there. A few years before I went as an ecumenical accompanier, I went to Faslane. I went to Faslane from Iona, where I was on the staff. The first time I went with Brian Woodcock, who was my colleague, and we were very unpopular because we went during staff training. The next time I actually went on my own. Brian had moved on, and I travelled on my own. So I knew what to expect. I'd been to Faslane before, I'd risked arrest before, I'd been arrested before. I knew what to expect, and I didn't relish it. And the day unfolded, and the night unfolded, and the next day, and then I found myself on my way back on the West Highland line. And as the train pulled out of Glasgow Queen Street, I suddenly searched for a notebook and I started to write, and I wrote most of the way on the West Highland Line a series of poems. I'm not going to read them all, but trying to hold on to that experience of starting alone and then becoming part of a community of protest. Going to Faslane. Singing across Mull, feeling small, insignificant, powerless, alone, I sing as I travel into the unknown. How many others have raised fearful faces and reedy voices among these glens or in darker places? How many, doing so, have raised their hearts when hope seemed dead and gone, and through song alone found strength to travel on? As we came to the demonstration, here's one for Kathy and Molly. Ministers without collars or churches, I hear one of you liberating song against the barbed wire and watch the other feeding folk in detention bread rolls buttered and filled before dawn, enough for all, including the police. Where such ministry is happening, who needs church order? Nevertheless, while we were there on the demonstration and at the gates of the nuclear base, we shared communion. We shared communion at the gates of Faslane, one of the places in a broken world where breaking bread and drinking bitter wine is most relevant. We shared it to remember security, not of barbed wire and missiles, but of God's love that risks all and gives life. We shared it in a warm circle of believers, but later, when we sat down on the cold road, we found that the bread and the cup had escaped and was still out there in the crowd, being shared carefully among people of all kinds. This paradox of pain and promise being passed from hand to hand in a broken world. But we shouldn't have been sitting on the road, and we were lifted up and arrested and then waited by the police vans to be charged. Quietness flows back on the edge of the crowd. Hills are still there in the impartial clouds, drum beats and shouting distanced. I stand in line, waiting to be charged, and between formal words and human conversation, find the silence I need to observe the tracery of twigs with buds ready to break on both sides of the wire. And we went off to Clydebank police station, I think it was. And it was a long time of being in a cell. There were 3 of us in that cell. 3 women sleep in a cell on a cold floor, enclosed by cold, bare walls. 3 people who sometime could share stories of warmth, nourishment, laughter, hope of new life, and the commitment that brought us to this place. But now we are too tired, worn with wanting change, also with cold that creeps into our bones and into our soul. Then I stood back or sat back in the train on the West Highland line, and I looked at what I'd written so far, and I was impatient with myself. Crumbs. These are just crumbs of discomfort. In other parts of the world, people are detained without trial, tortures, kept in solitary, starved, deprived of human rights. Here, people with different lives grow up in institutions, become persistent offenders, are brutalized, never know their birthright. So, having been read our rights, are we just playing at being part of this broken world? Or do these crumbs we taste contain the whole world for which we pray, and mysteriously the way God enters it? Fast forward to this year, like quite a lot of people, I think, I have been writing a great deal during the lockdown, during the pandemic, trying to make sense of it. The words that have been to help me to explore and understand what is happening. And poems came unbidden, and some of them very strange, but it was necessary for me to write them. I also found the joy of groups of people writing to and for each other and communicating that way, not just as therapy, but because words connect and can heal us. And so can other things. So the last one is a very simple poem about a very simple incident in a village on Mull, where we lead relatively safe lives, but we still obey all the rules about distancing and so forth. Touch. May's mild air stroked my skin. My sleeves rolled up for some household chore. When I opened the door, I couldn't invite you in, but stood on the step with you over there on the street in the sun. Distanced, we greeted, agreed the weather, discussed local issues. One, I could see, touched you deeply. Words grew warm. The gap between us narrowed. And then, responding to something I said, you smiled, leaned forward, and touched my arm. You touched me. No one had done that for 2 months. Touch, like an electric shock on the skin in which I'd been wrapped up for long enough, living alone, isolated, safe. Touch, meaning risk, confusion, defenses down, reconnection. You touched me, I said. We both laughed. But I felt something breaking deep inside, or germinating. And that one comes from an anthology which I was invited to put together, called Voices Out of Lockdown, with other people's voices. And as I worked on it, it was an enormous privilege to hear their voices, and in another way to be touched by what other people had experienced and wanted to share. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. We can be thankful that on October 24th, the UN Treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons entered into force. And think of all the people and some of the Iona community members that helped to work towards that. And, you know, Helen Stephen, Ellen Moxley, Brian Quayle, Alan and Moira Collette Wilkie, Jean Oliver and Douglas Shaw, Kathy, Molly, so many, smell such people I'm missing. I'm sorry about that. And a lot of those people have written for Wild Goose and have written for Wild Goose about that, about peacekeeping, about nonviolence. I just wanted to remind, I just wanted to tell folk about another couple resources about Palestine that Wild Goose has put out. And one of them, it just came out, I talked about this before, was is Sue Dale's new book. And there's a whole chapter on Palestine, Israel, from community members, you know, who've worked in the Kairos movement and who've worked as ecumenical accompaniers like you have, Jan. You know, Warren Bardsley's in there, Mike Miniter, Eirik Skandrit. And there's a piece from Hein Khoury, the General Secretary of Kairos Palestine. And another resource that Wild Goose put out is 7 Days that you edited, Jan, Stories and Reflections for the World Week for Peace in Palestine and Israel, with yourself, Rosemary Power, Warren Bardsley again, Eirik, Norman Shanks, and other folk who I'm forgetting, I'm sure. And of course, there's Exile in Israel, Runa's amazing book. Jan, always when I read your writing and when I listen to you read, it might be just me, but I always think of you as a person, actually, as being very in the moment. The kingdom God is now. And I think about that as you, as you know, the poem you read about Palestine, being there, or talking to somebody in an olive grove, being at Fastlane Communion, being on Iona with guests, sharing stories one-on-one with guests or with a group, being in the moment with somebody in the village where you live in Bunessan, which I know you're so rooted to, talking and sharing the news, the ups and downs, or being in the moment, you know, noticing flowers, birds, the wind. And sometimes in a lot of your pieces, so many of those moments are combined, like any great poet would be able to do, or any great short story writer would do. So when I read your material, I always think about being in the moment, how to be more in the moment, so that I can be more present to other people and to the world, and how I can be more in the moment so that God can use me better in a one-on-one or in my community. Of course, I fail at that all the time. I'm a fragile, broken, mixed up, you know, sometimes connected person, but I'm trying and I'm working on it. So I'll let you know how I'm doing it, as I do. If anyone has any questions for anyone who's reading tonight, you could chat them. I can't really see it because I'm on a mobile phone, so I don't really know. I'm not going to try to do that because I'll just probably end up signing out of the meeting, but you could chat them and they'll probably answer back or say hello or something. Look, it's the Goose again. Hey, you know what that means. It's a question. You can win a free book. You email me at the end of this meeting with the right answer, first right answer. I get in touch with you. You get a book from the magic basket of books I have here. So I think my question this time is, Ron Ferguson, you know, who everyone knows Ron, amazing writer, what a wordsmith. Always a good one, a lot of times always a good one for titles. So this was a Wild Goose publication. I'm not saying whether it's in print or not in print. You could check the internet, but then you'd be cheating if you did that. So don't do that. First right answer. What was the title of Ron's publication when he was, I think he was a leader at the time, and he was traveling around India? It's a great title. And so it's Ron's book. I don't know if Ron's out there. but I still love that book, Ron. So what's the title of that book? Email me, neil@ionabooks.com, and you could win a free book. So now I'm going to hand on to Katharine Preston in New York State. And I thought, because the UN Climate Change Conference is coming up in November 2001 in Glasgow at the SEC, I think, COP26, it would be apt if Katharine read a couple extracts from Field with a View, Science and Faith in a Time of Climate Change. And I'll just leave it to Katharine to go from there. Thanks, Katharine.
Thank you, Neil. I'm incredibly honored to be among a group of writers that many of whom have written for Wild Goose for a while. I'm new on the scene, and I was honored to be asked to write this book, and it was wonderful to work with Neil. I'm going to read two different excerpts, one from the very first chapter where I deal with this issue of faith in science, and then from a little later chapter on grief and climate change. And in between, I deal with everything from process theology to indigenous views of the world, and a number of other things. But first, this from the first chapter, which is called No Inconsistency. And I start with a quote. Less and less do I see any difference between research and adoration. That is from Teilhard de Chardin. I am deep in the mountains alongside a lake. I see mostly stillness, but also the gentle, almost imperceptible movement of a layer of mist gliding across the lake's quiet surface. From my vantage point on the western shore, the mist moves slowly toward the opposite ridge, eastward and southward, where this late in the season, the sun will soon make its mid-morning appearance from behind a forested slope. Although the scene is replicated on the lake's mirror surface, the thin blanket of mist obscures the line between substance and image. The peaks of 2 or 3 giant white pines float incongruously in the mist, and where the mist begins to dissipate higher up the forested slope, there is a hint of autumnal color. A squirrel pitches a warning chatter into the stillness, and a raven sounds its washboard croak. There's a suspension of time and breath for a moment, and then the ridgeline begins to glow, shimmering with the sun's rays at the season's designated azimuth. The pace of movement quickens, the mist accelerates across the lake's surface, rising to meet the warming air. And as the sun's rays finally spill over the ridgeline, a joyful greeting dance begins, mist and sun twirling above the surface of the lake. The dance can be explained through basic physics. The interacting properties of air and water and temperature gradients. It is not a one-time event. It has happened millions of mornings before, right here on this wilderness lake, and will happen millions of mornings afterward, whether I am here or not. But the event's scientific explanation does not reduce the grace of the moment, and the revelatory nature of my experience of it does not deny the science. The two aspects blend together nicely in my soul. Indeed, they enhance each other. Later on in the chapter, climate change seems to broaden the chasm between science and faith. It has become easier for some to deny the science than to face the existential questions prompted by a vision of a world radically changed by the way some of us live. Yet, the two have never needed each other more. Writer and environmental activist Bill McKibben has commented that because of the moral compass that they provide, religious communities are deeply important to the efforts to mitigate the effects of climate change. This wisdom is not new. Some decades ago, ecologist Aldo Leopold argued for the integration of a scientifically based land ethic into the moral code of society, suggesting that much could be gained by religions adopting an active role in the integration. The scientific environmental community increasingly recognizes the church's capacity to shape worldviews and provide the moral authority indispensable to the cause of scientific inquiry. And faith communities use ecological statistics and scientific rationale to reinforce their efforts to preserve God's creation, as well as to promote justice for the poor, who are suffering on the front lines of human-induced destruction of the environment. Not a moment too soon. We need all the cooperation we can stand. We've got to get beyond the false conflict between science and religion, for it takes our eye off the real matter of trying to mitigate the effects of climate change. Once again, we rearrange the deck chairs of the religion versus science debate, while the iceberg of global climate disruption looms across our bow. I'm on the CCN group concerned with environmental matters, and it is wonderful to be in that group. We are a lot of people, obviously from Great Britain and some from the continent and a couple from America, but way beyond that as well. And that is important, extremely important. And we hope that we will continue to bring some ideas back to the community about how to proceed forward, particularly as Neil has indicated with the fact that the COP26 will be in Glasgow. But one of the issues that I've noted, perhaps more than anything else when I talk to people about climate change, is an underlying sense of grief. So I'm going to just read a bit from that chapter. And I started also with a quote: "We have met the enemy and he is us," as Pogo said. Early this morning, as I walk out to retrieve the newspaper, 3 loosely aligned skeins of geese fly rooftop low over the farmhouse and the maple tree blazing yellow. There's some merging of the tangled lines and much noisy discussion about it all. The mid-autumn sun, already arched well to the south, illuminates their rhythmically undulating bodies so very close against the blue open sky. It is breathtaking, a moment of grace. In one of her poems, Mary Oliver named her house Gratitude in response to her close and precious experience of the natural world around her. Notice is certainly one of the first things that God invites us to do. But for me at least, and apparently for Oliver, attentiveness is not the end of it. Geese moments and other sublime experiences of the wild are an unexpected gift. And after the wow comes an overwhelming urge to say, thank you. At these times, I thank the transcendent presence I call God. Perhaps it would be the same thing to thank fate or circumstance for putting me in the paths of flying geese. I don't know. Thanking God works for me. As I watch the fleet of geese move on over the fields, their random honking fading and their bodies becoming a wobbling dotted V to the south, another reality interrupts. I recall the comment by one climate scientist that we are over-carbonizing our ways to an entirely different planet. Heart-stricken, I hear myself cry, I don't want an entirely different planet. Granted, I cry from a position of privilege. I have never had to worry about a typhoon taking the roof off my house or the rains arriving in time to save the parched crops that will feed my family and me. I have lived and traveled in places where the beauty and sublimity of the landscape left me speechless with wonder and gratitude. Naturally, I hope my grandchildren and great-grandchildren to the 7th generation will experience the same security and be able to hear goose music floating down from the sky. But alongside my selfish whining and privilege is my awareness that the evolution toward an entirely different planet is already causing acute suffering for millions of people. They are unable to adapt to rapid climate changes because they are poor, marginalized, and voiceless. They are desperate simply to live where they have always lived, but instead are forced to flee drought or flood or the all too human wars that ensue, becoming the world's climate refugees. Climate change is the greatest existential and moral issue of our time, perhaps of any time. To many people and places, extreme weather events have already brought destruction, loss of livelihood, and death. To others, the prospect of climate change has brought despair, chaotic misunderstandings, fear, denial. The denial bewilders some of us, but it is not really surprising. The idea that humans can actually radically change planet Earth is, at face value, ridiculous. It is far easier to look away, but that is no longer an option for anyone who cares about generations to come. In fact, it is increasingly clear that indeed there must be a proportional response to this existential threat. Business as usual is no longer an option. The denial and reluctance of those most comfortable with the status quo are understandable, but they are not condonable. There is simply too much to lose. Thank you.
Thanks, Katharine. Thank you. You know, I love the really lyrical, I love your writing, but I love the really lyrical parts of your writing, the really poetic parts of your writing. And I remember talking to you on an email, and I'm sort of paraphrasing you, but I think it might have been just the mood you were in or whatever. You questioned me and you said, yeah, but can poetry change the world? And I thought, yeah, it can. Of course it can. Yeah, it can. But I guess with your writing and with that book, it's the combination of heart and head for me that works very well. I mean, the lyrical bits, you know, they remind me of other American writers like Annie Dillard and Mary Oliver. And I mean, yeah, I know that. And going back, it's the line going back to Thoreau, I guess, too. So thank you. I guess we're gonna take a little break for some music. You can stretch. You can get a cup of tea. You can get a cup of coffee. You can get a dram. You can go play with the cat. And we're gonna, on the break, we're gonna hear some music from the new Wild Goose Resource Group, Wild Goose Collective CD. That was one that Graham Moll oversaw that CD, and it's This Is God's World, and this is a track that Graham sings on. So you can think about how much Graham contributed to Wild Goose Publications, the resource group, and the Iona Community, and how much he continues to contribute to it as part of the Communion of Saints. So we'll come back in about 5 minutes, about 5 minutes or so. Take care, and hope you enjoy the music.
had been a basket maker, but that was in the days before chain stores and mass production and foreign imports and the ubiquitous plastic. So making baskets was a thing of the past for Jerry, a thing of the long distant, almost forgotten past. Gerald Black, Esquire, bespoke basket maker, had been the sign over his well-stocked shop in Edinburgh's Stevenson Street, the outside festooned with quality wicker baskets of all shapes and sizes. But that was now a hazy memory. The truth of it was Jerry Black had been down on his luck for many years. The reduction in the bespoke basket trade and the demolition of his shop and all the others in the street had been the start of it, right enough. But the drink had done the rest, and it had done plenty of damage to Jerry Black. Homelessness for Jerry had become a way of life. Homeless men, mostly men, were figures of revulsion, labelled dossers and winos to be avoided at all costs. Indeed, there were parts of the city which had been left to become the favoured haunts of the city's homeless, most of them unable to get a bed in the Salvation Army Hospital or the Lodging House Mission, reduced to sleeping rough, doing an outsider in the closest stairs and backyards of the city's undesirable areas. Timothy hated the dossers. Indeed, he would go out of his way to avoid them. It was the only thing that disturbed him about the city that had become his student home. Dossers and winos were a blight on a beautiful city. That's why Timothy would find it hard to explain why he became friends with Jerry Black. It started when Timothy was waiting for a bus and saw a bedraggled old figure emerge from an alleyway next to the bus shelter. He was about to dismiss the pathetic figure as another dosser when he realized that the old man was carrying a bundle of canes under his arm. Timothy watched with growing fascination as the old man divested himself of his mangy coat and laid it carefully on the pavement at the corner of the street. He sat down and, placing the bundle of canes by his side, carefully pulled out 3 strands and started to plait them together. Timothy couldn't quite make out what was going on, but could see clearly enough that something was taking shape in the old man's hands. Then, rummaging in the pocket of his coat, the old fella extracted something with obvious glee and somehow incorporated it into the object of his attention. Then, the work done, he snipped off the ends of the canes with a knife also retrieved from his coat pocket and held the finished object in front of his face to inspect it carefully. Timothy realized that what the old man had made was a wickerwork baby's rattle. The rattle made from the canes, the rattling noise coming from 3 bottle tops. That was the first of many rattles that Timothy watched Jerry Black make over the next 3 years. For Timothy got to know Jerry very well indeed. Arthritis in his fingers meant that Jerry could only do 1 or 2 rattles a day. And even then, they didn't bring in much money. But Jerry was a proud man and felt that begging was beneath him. Selling rattles was fine. Begging and offering nothing in return was not. He wouldn't even take money from Timothy, even although Timothy pressed him often enough. And that's why Timothy accumulated more wickerwork babies' rattles with bottle tops in them than he'd cared to admit. Jerry Black had no place to lay his head. Timothy would think of the old man doing an outsider while he was tucked up in his warm student flat. He would think of an old basket maker in his glory days when life was braw, and think of him sitting on his coat at a street corner, reduced to making rattles for children. He would think of a society that had rejected Jerry Black and wondered where things had gone wrong. When Timothy returned to the university for his final year, Jerry Black was nowhere to be found. During the first few weeks of term, Timothy searched Jerry's usual haunts, but he never saw the old basket maker again. No one knew what had happened to Jerry Black. Timothy hasn't kept any of Jerry Black's rattles. He wishes he had, but they probably wouldn't pass the health and safety test for his grandchildren anyway. But when they're big enough, he'll tell his grandsons about Gerald Black, Esquire, bespoke basket maker, and to make sure they know what a city can do to an old master craftsman. The second story, I'm an observer of life, and I always get fascinated by people. I also write in pictures. If I have a picture in my head and I can imagine a person or a scene, then, as Jan was saying earlier, sometimes the stuff just writes itself, and my job is just to write it down. This is a story from this book, Welcoming Each Wonder. It's originally called The Age of Innocence, but tonight it's just called Ali. As the new policeman on the estate, PC Eddie Harrower was spending time getting the feel of the place and found himself down at the local football pitch watching some of the boys having a kick around. One athletic looking lad seemed to be running kind of awkwardly as if he was carrying an injury. Just then, the limping footballer was tackled ferociously by a flying winger. They both fell in a heap. There was much writhing about and exchanging of oaths. The big lad was first to his feet. "Bugger me," he shouted. "You damn near broke my leg. See if it's knackered. You're for it, son. Nae messing." With that, he rolled up the bottom of his denims to examine the injured leg for damage. Eddie expected to see severe bruising, if not an ugly bleeding gash. What he saw, to his absolute surprise, was a flesh-coloured, shiny, artificial leg. The irate centre half rubbed the prosthesis lovingly, the way anyone would massage a damaged limb. He looked down at the still writhing opponent and broke into a broad grin. "You're off the hook, wee man. It's no even scratched. Just as well, eh?" And with his trouser leg rolled back down, he swiveled on his good leg, called his troops back into action, and limped off into the fray once more. The one-legged football player turned out to be Alan Morton McInnes, forever carrying the names of the legendary Glasgow Rangers winger of the 1920s, Alan Morton, one of the Wembley Wizards. Ali was a young leader in the local YMCA club. And over the months, Eddie got to know Alan, or Ali as he was better known, very well indeed, and came to admire him a great deal. It turned out that Ali had a leg amputated when he was 5 years old. He'd been messing about behind an ice cream van and it had reversed over him. He was lucky to survive, but his leg couldn't be saved. So from then on, he'd had a succession of artificial limbs. And now in adult life, at the ripe old age of 19, it didn't seem to bother him at all. Ali would often regale Eddie with stories of the time when he'd worked in a local factory just after he left school, and would regularly purloin goodies from the production line and hide them inside his artificial leg, all to escape the scrutiny of the security guards on the way out. And Eddie, being the polis, pretended he didn't hear. But most of all, Eddie quickly became aware that Ali was brilliant with the kids. He would be seen regularly at the after-school club with a bunch of wee ones, sitting on the floor of the club room, telling them fantastic stories. One week, it would be about him losing his leg in a battle with a sword-wielding giant in a far-off exotic land. The next, it would be how he'd used his artificial leg to ward off a roaring lion who'd found his way into his tenement kitchen. And on another, he would be singing a made-up song. I'm Ali and I have to hop. You know I can't possibly stop. I wear this false leg like a giant clothes peg, which I got from a novelty shop. Boom, boom. The kids absolutely loved it. Singing and storytelling time with one-legged Ali was always the highlight of the week. And it always seemed to be the most difficult kids, the most damaged ones, who related to Ali the most. He would spend hour after hour with kids who'd worn out the patience of the most tolerant of youth leaders in 3.5 minutes flat. But that's because Ali seemed to have endless patience. He gave the most troublesome youngsters all the time they needed. In a rare, quiet moment with Ali, when he had one of his occasional pauses for breath between his stories and his messing about, Eddie asked him why it was the hardest kids, the most difficult ones, that he spent time with. He thought for a moment, and with an unusually serious look on his face, he replied, well, see, it's no me that looks for them, Eddie. It's I them that seem to come out to me. So why you? Eddie asked. There was another long pause and an even more serious frown. Well, see, I lost my innocence early on, Ken. The leg, see? And I had to grow up awfully quick, or else the other kids, when I made mincemeat of me, these kids have lost their innocence too. No, we're losing a leg, Ken, but we're losing other things like childhood and family life and parents and friends. They've had more chopped off than I ever had. They've lost more than one leg, they kids. Maybe they'll no survive, but they have to have a decent crack at it, Ken. Maybe seeing how I've coped can give them another chance. Alan Morton McInnes broke into a wide grin. Being serious was obviously over for now. Did I ever tell you the time I used my gammy leg as a plant stand for my granny's aspidestra? Thank you.
Thank you, Thom. Thank you, Thom.
Thank you.
Your writing is so human. I've always thought that. That's the word I think about. I think of when I read your writing. So much about seeing Christ in the world. I also always go back to your writing that came out of when you worked at the hospice, the Mary Curie hospice. I think that writing is incredibly powerful. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Look, it's the goose again. Hey, it's the goose. That means it's a question. It's a question. So we're going to do Kate Mcelhager. Somebody's writing I always go back to. I think her book's beautiful. Just so beautiful. All you have to do is email me the title of Kate Mcelhager's collection.
What's your email address?
And my email is neil@ionabooks.com. That's really, really simple. Okay, that's it. That's the question. Okay, I guess you're hearing me okay. I was wondering if I was muted there, but I don't think I am. I'm just going to read one wee short one. You've heard from me enough. This is called The Rainbow Man, and I always go back to it. And I think this originally was in Praying for the Dawn that Kathy and Ruth edited. And I still thank them for it, for even noticing me. Nobody else had ever noticed any of my writing in my whole life. And it seemed very important to me then. It's still important to me now, but so this is The Rainbow Man. And this comes out of an experience working in a homeless shelter, which is what I did a lot in London, in Ottawa, Canada, in Edinburgh after Iona, before I was working as an editor. And I worked in a lot of nursing homes too. The Rainbow Man. I met the Rainbow Man in a night shelter for homeless men. The Rainbow Man dressed in bright colors, tie-dyed t-shirts, purple hair, pink nail polish, spoke in colors. It was a depressing, colorless place. Dingy, dirty yellow walls, clouds of gray cigarette smoke hanging. He was labeled mentally ill, schizophrenic. At one time, he had studied fine arts at college, somebody said, and had worked masterfully in oils and acrylics. Now he worked in Crayola crayon, drew like a child, dogs and cats and upside down pink-orange flowers planted in clouds. He got beat up by the men a lot. One day, he brought a leaf in from a walk he took. He was always taking long walks, and held it up to me and said, to look, see the light in the leaf, pulsing, dancing still. I was busy and tired and had forgotten how to see and said, yeah, it's a maple leaf, so what? There was someone buzzing at the door again, paperwork, so many important things to do. The light in the leaf, he said again, and danced away in a whirl of wind. And when I sat down and stopped, I realized that what he meant was to look and see that energy, that essence alive in the leaf. He could see it. He was supposed to be disabled, but he was able to see the light of God in a leaf and to wonder at it. After weeks of running blind through my life, the Rainbow Man taught me to open my eyes and heart again. I think we're going to go on to Thom Schuman now. Thom, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thanks so much for taking time. I know you had to rejig your schedule, and we really appreciate that. And thanks to everyone who's read tonight. But thanks so much for doing that, Thom.
Glad to be it. It's a.
Oh, I like your cat.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. It's an honor to be a part of this group. 30 years ago, I was called to pastor a Presbyterian church in Cincinnati, Ohio. One of the members there was a woman from Ireland who, at one point in her life, had attended a school for deaconesses at St. Colm's in Edinburgh. And there she had met and become good friends with Sybil and Graham Brown. And so she was very closely connected with the Iona community. Every year she would say to me, you need to go to Iona. And every year I would say, I hope. Well, back in 2001, I received a grant that allowed me to take 3.5 months off from ministry and began my month on Iona with the community during Holy Week. And there I got to know Jan, and I started doing a little bit of writing and shared some of that, and she was very encouraging. A couple of years later, I submitted some pieces for a book that Ruth Burgess was going to edit that ended up being Candles and Conifers. And she emailed me after I sent some stuff and asked if I'd ever heard of something called the Jesse Tree. I had written a series of Advent devotions called the Jesse Tree for my congregation. I sent those in, and they actually published that as a separate Advent devotional. And I've been fortunate enough that they have published quite a few books of mine, and I've contributed to a number of resources. Ruth Harvey, when she was editor at the Coracle, was very encouraging. And Neil, I could not ask for a better editor. Both he and Ruth, in editing all the different resources and books and stuff, have just been a great support and encouragement. So I am blessed to be able to share my words with you folks. The first piece I'm going to read tonight is from Daily Readings for Advent, called Christmas in the Diner. Some of you know that we have a 35-year-old son who has multiple disabilities, mentally and developmentally. And for about 28 years, he has lived pretty much most of his life in facilities for persons like himself. Because of that, we have spent many of our holidays on the road to go visit him. And on Christmas Day especially, we would end up eating in some sort of diner because that was the only place that was open. And so the reading I have tonight is called God in the Diner, and it comes from some of the observations I made in a diner. God of the Diner. They pulled in late at night, the parking lot overflowing because it was the only place open for the holiday. The dash was blinking, check engine. They were running on gas fumes and bone weary from the long trip. With calloused blue-collar hands, he helped his baby coming at any moment wife out of the pickup and into the warm diner, where a couple of Goths offered them their booth so they wouldn't be placed on the 45 minutes at least waiting list. When her water broke, the waitresses grabbed towels, the short order cook gave the husband a snort from his hip flask, and the cop at the end of the counter delivered the newborn, gently placing him in a nest of clean aprons, while the squeaky-voiced cashier began to sing Silent Night until all joined in. The stammering introvert, the burly college student, the lonely grandparents, the voiceless teenager signing along. And in all the commotion, no one noticed the grizzled trucker slip the manager the funds to pay everyone's bill, as well as a nest egg for the little one and his family. And then, like Jan mentioned earlier, when the pandemic started, I just started writing quite a bit, almost every day, several times a day, and I was privileged to be able to contribute to the Voices Out of Lockdown book that she edited. I've always been intrigued by the ways that we can reimagine, reshape the Beatitudes and the Psalms for our days. So this is the Beatitudes for these days. Blessed are they who wash their hands, for they shall hold living water. Blessed are those who keep their distance, for they shall draw closer to God. Blessed are they who self-quarantine, for they shall help others. Blessed are those who do not hoard, for they shall feed families. Blessed are those who sing songs to sheltering neighbors, for they shall be members of the heavenly host. Blessed are the parents who learn to teach at home, for they shall learn from their children. Blessed are they who shop for older folk, for they shall receive everlasting thanks. Blessed are the frontline health workers, for they shall be called healers of humanity. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Thom. Thanks, Thom. Thom, I know that writing is very much part of your spiritual discipline. Could you tell me a little bit about that? And I don't know, you might want to offer, maybe somebody else would be interested in incorporating that into their spiritual discipline. How do you do that? How does that work in your day?
I don't have a particular time or moment during the day when I sit down and write. It's more, I like to say that the Holy Spirit is my muse. So when she nudges me, I'll start writing. A lot of mine is kind of a form of lectio divina. I'll read one of the Psalms or read one of the lectionary readings for the day, and that will trigger a thought or word, a phrase, and then I'll start writing something at that point. And I think like what Ruth Burgess said earlier, I'm trying to learn how to simplify my writing so, I don't have to use too many words to get the point across.
I'll gladly help you do that.
I know you're very good at that. So.
I always find you have such a distinctive voice. Whenever I get something from you, it's a Thom voice. Your voice is so distinctive. I mean, like any writer, like any good writer, your voice is very much you. And I know voices don't come easy. I mean,
right.
Well, I don't think. Well, I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe they come easy to somebody, but I always think there's a lot of words pass by before you. Maybe before you find your voice. A lot of life goes by before you find your voice.
Right.
What you want to write about. Thank you. And you're going to give us a blessing to go out on in a minute. Yeah. Okay.
Yep, sure will.
That'd be great. That's great. Like I said, if you have any questions for anyone who read tonight, you can try chatting them. So Wild Goose has hundreds, really literally hundreds of titles when it gets down to downloads, and we'll gladly help you find what you might be looking for a service or what you might be interested in reading. Admin at ionabooks.com. Jane and Sandra and I will help you as best we can. Might take a wee bit of time, but we'll try the best we can. We got lots of books coming up for 2011, like down the track. The Camus book that Rachel McCann put together, that'll be out in 2021. Ruth Burgess has an autumn book coming out. These are just a few highlights that I'm just picking out. There's a mental health book coming out, resources. Iona Abbey cookbook. I think Third Thoughts from John is coming out. Third Thoughts from the Day, a book from Joe Love. Those are just some. There are lots of others. Leavening of Life with Pat Bennett. There's This is God's World, the book for to connect with the CD. Tom Gordon, Whispers of Wisdom. I'm missing things, but forgive me for that. And let's see what else I have to remember here. I just really wanted to thank Fiona Fidgen and Isabel Sorrell for the help with the Zoom. And I talked to them during the week and they were great at helping me kind of get that organized. And thanks again to co-workers, Jane, Dark, Riley, who's amazing and great to talk to some days. And it's really nice, honest, human talk. And same with Sandra. And, the reason Wild Goose has survived and thrived in the last couple decades is Sandra's steering. Thanks, Sandra. I think that's it. We could do a last book giveaway. Why not? I got so many books. I want to give them away. I want to give them to people. I want to make you happy. So the last question, Neil at Iona Books. You can start emailing after this is over. Neil at ionabooks.com. Yeah, well, it's been up there, I think. So I have lots of books I've loved this year, but one of my favorite books this year, very original book, I think, is by the member Mcelhager. So all you have to do is give me the title of that book, but give me the title and the subtitle. I mean, I don't want to make it too easy. So it's the title and subtitle, the book that came out by Mcelhager, and then you'll get a free book from the magic basket of books. Thom, would you like to? I hope I'm not forgetting anything.
Neil, before you, just to let you have a
Yes,
chance to remember, I just want to say thank you, Neil Paynter, on behalf of everybody that's here, on behalf of Wild Goose Publications, on behalf of all the writers present and absent tonight. You are part of this remarkable team, Wild Goose Publications. Sandra and Jane, I salute you. You're both here. It's great to see you here. Helen, it's great to see you sitting next to Neil. I'm sure you're part of the genius as well. But Neil, we salute you and thank you for holding this evening together and for all the evenings to come like this. I hope you've seen your fan base emerging. We've lost you. So,
I got a low battery.
Okay.
I want to thank all the Wild Goose writers, everyone who's written for Wild Goose, and all the readers too.
Don't forget Tom's blessing.
And Thom, why don't you give us a blessing? Thank you very much.
Okay.
Take care, everyone.
All right. On this pilgrimage of uncertainty, may we remember God has been down this road before. May we remember Jesus knows our loneliness. May we remember the Spirit shares hope in these moments. And now may the peace of the rolling waves, the peace of the singing, the silent mountains, the peace of the singing stars, and the deep, deep peace of the Prince of Peace be with us now and in all the days to come. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.